So today, we're going to be talking about this book that I recently purchased, The Basic Needs of a Woman in Labor. It's so short, like, look at that, 40 pages, I think, but it was a really good read. And I'm really looking forward to kind of synthesizing the information from it for you today. And then kind of like using it as a spin-off to talk about some other thoughts that came up for me as I was reading it. Especially as it pertains to home birth and the decisions that we make about our birth plans and our birth attendants. So it'll be great. But first, let me also just remind you that starting on the 14th, we have a workshop, the live workshop going on that I'm really excited to do. This will be a first for me also, to just kind of offer 5 days of trainings and homework just to keep you or help you get thinking about and moving closer to your intentions and hopes for your birth. So I think it'll be really valuable. We're going to cover a lot because it's going to be 5 days of stuff. And I'm also going to be unveiling and inviting you into a new offering that honestly I am just over the moon excited about, because I know it's going to make such an impact. So come to that if you can. There'll also be prizes. The more you participate and show up live and print your workbook and all these little things I'm going to have you do, I'm going to be giving away fun things like mugs and t-shirts and gift cards. So super fun. And the replays will be available. Yes, they will, for like several days after the workshop ends, and then they'll be gone. So you'll have the short window of time to watch the replays if you can't tune in live to each of the trainings over those 5 days. I also just want to share with you, I got happy mail today from my friend who's a doula in Ohio. She and her doula partners, Licking County doulas in Ohio. So if you live in Ohio, you need to know these people. But she sent me this. They made this postpartum planning workbook for their clients. And it's so special and just well thought out. And I love so much that they made this, because it gets at something I feel very passionately about, which is that what we do after our birth matters just as much as what we do during it. So I don't know if they're going to be selling this, but I'm going to tell her maybe they should sell it more widely. The back is like local resources, but I'm sure they could make a version that's just more generalized. Anyway, Licking County doulas, if you live in Columbus, Ohio area, you need them. She also sent me fun stickers. Anyway, okay, enough about happy mail. On to the main agenda, The Basic Needs of a Woman in Labor. So this book is written by a woman named Ruth Erhardt, who is actually a South African midwife, who is really influenced heavily by the work of Michel Audant. And if you don't know Michel Audant, you probably should. He is a French obstetrician. And I know that in home birth circles, we don't usually sing the praises of obstetricians, but he is different sort. He was known for pioneering basically a like birthing center in where he works in France that was so woman and baby friendly that it's just midwives learned from him. Like, he is kind of a hero of many midwives for good reason. And he's done a lot of like almost anthropological looking into kind of like how cultures across time and around the world have handled birth, and what women really need and how to really honor the needs of a woman and a baby in labor. And he has many books. One of them is called Do We Need Midwives? I can't remember the names of the others right now. But so the author of this tiny book was really influenced by his work, and I think attended some of his trainings. And then she essentially synthesized a lot of his main principles into this little readable book, which I probably from now on am going to recommend anyone who's having a home birth and you're trying to decide who to have come, like say you're thinking about inviting a sister or a mother or mother-in-law or a friend, whatever. This would be the thing that I would probably have them read first, because it's only 40 pages, so nobody can complain about that. Possibly your husband too could read this. There's no pictures, so it's not like graphic, and it's just this really beautiful short summary of like, what does a woman need when she's in labor? And it feels very actionable. Like, you're going to learn a lot, and then it's like, I can do that. I can give that to a woman. Like, it's almost a crash course in how to be an appropriate birth attendant. And there is even, in fact, an entire section in here about the birth attendant. The perfect birth attendant is a silent, low-profile midwife who basically gets all the principles in this book. All right, so let me kind of just talk through with you parts that stuck out to me. In the beginning, there is a little foreword by Michel Audant himself, and this kind of blew my mind. I'm just going to read it out loud, actually, this little paragraph. There are 2 important published documents about birth physiology and the basic needs of laboring women. I bet you're trying to guess what those 2 published documents are. The first one is an enormous book written thousands of years ago. In the very first page of this bestseller, there are some lines suggesting an association between the consumption of the fruit of the tree of knowledge, translate knowing too much, or having a developed powerful neocortex, and the difficulties of human birth. It's just blowing my mind. At the end of this same book, we can read about the birth of a legendary man whose mission was to promote love. His mother found a strategy to overcome the human handicap of difficulties in human birth. With humility, she gave birth among non-human mammals in a stable. So he's essentially referencing the Bible and just reading some lessons about birth into the Genesis story and the Nativity story that I never had connected before. And I thought was very fascinating. Whether or not theologians would agree that that's accurate is another question, but I appreciated that kind of fresh take on what we can pull away from birth from those 2 Bible stories. So a lot of what Michelle O'Donnell talks about, well, you'll see. We'll get there. Okay. That was a teaser. So in the introduction, this stuck out to me too, which is written by the author of this book, Ruth. She said she was thanking someone who works as a doula. And she said about her, Liliana is quiet and unassuming woman who holds an incredible strength in doing very little at birth. She holds an incredible strength in doing very little at birth. She is able to hold the space with her presence alone, a quiet strength. She must make a woman feel very safe in labor. Okay, as a birth worker, birth attendant, birth keeper, I wrote by that in the margin, I want to be her. That is what I strive to be. That I think when our egos get in the way, when we're attending a birth of someone else, we feel this compulsion to use our hands and to do something to kind of like prove that we have worth or value or purpose in being invited into this space. But honestly, I have come to realize and believe, both from how I've been attended at my births and from how I have most impacted other women when I attend theirs, that the less I do, often the better it is. That being able to sit on my hands or hide behind my camera and quietly observe and maintain a posture of trust and prayer goes so far. It goes so far. And you think, why would anyone pay you to show up and just sit there and trust and take pictures and pray? But another quote from this book explains why that is. One cannot help an involuntary process, aka birth. The point is not to disturb it. So good. Okay. So what are the basic needs of a woman when she's pregnant? It starts here in this book. And she basically says she needs people who will listen to her. And she talks about how the fetus developing inside the mother feels what the mother feels. So if the mother is feeling a lot of pain and anxiety and stress, the baby does feel that, picks it up energetically and biophysically. And conversely, if the woman is having fun and enjoying herself, Ruth maintains that that's really important, that it's really important for a pregnant woman to be having fun and to be enjoying herself. I love that. I don't feel like that's something that's commonly talked about. In fact, if you read most books about pregnancy, the focus is very much on all the things that could go wrong, right? Like the book, What to Expect When You're Expecting, is one of those books that whenever I see it for sale at a thrift store, I want to buy it just so I can destroy it. And the reason is that it just breeds so much insecurity and fear. And it points you to, at this stage in your pregnancy, this and this and this could go wrong. At this stage in your pregnancy, this and this and this could be wrong. Make sure you're avoiding this, 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 and this, and make sure you never do this, 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 and this, or else da, 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 da. Does that create an environment in which a woman is enjoying herself? No, it does not. It creates an environment in which a woman is incredibly anxious. And Ruth talks about that too. It's important to realize that our words can have a very strong effect on a pregnant woman. While we don't have to paint a flowery picture of pregnancy and birth and parenthood, we can be aware that it is not productive to dwell on the difficulties, the nausea, the heartburn, the swollen ankles, and tiredness. We need to remember and tell her of the exhilaration of birth and its beauty. And we must remember that the smallest thing can make a pregnant woman anxious. Caregivers sometimes don't realize how much power their words have and how much their words can influence an expectant mother's feelings. Many women leave their prenatal appointments feeling very worried about their baby's health, that something is wrong with them, and they often feel guilty. So caregivers, and I would add friends and family members, should remember this before they tell a woman that they think their baby might be too big, or that she has too little amniotic fluid, or that her body pressure or her blood pressure is too high, or that there's sugar in her urine. Unless there's a real and present danger, they should not worry a pregnant woman and her family unnecessarily. Worry during pregnancy can be harmful and counterproductive. Which brings me to something that I have been thinking about a lot lately. We have the ability in our culture and in our medical system, and even with midwives now, as they get increasingly more privileges to do tests and measurements and things, to find out a lot of information about what's going on with our babies in utero. We test blood pressure, we test for gestational diabetes, we do anatomy scans, we can do amniocentesis to test for genetic difficulties. There's so much information that we can gather with a relative degree of confidence about the woman's body when she's pregnant and the baby developing inside of her. And I sometimes wonder, like, if we do a cost-benefit analysis of that, is it worth it? Here's a classic example. The 20-week anatomy scan. I hear this all the time. The woman goes in for a 20-week anatomy scan and is told that she has a partial placenta previa. Placenta previa, if you don't know, is when the placenta is partially overlaying the cervix. So, and the cervix being what needs to open up to let the baby through. So in a previa, the placenta is either partially or fully covering up that cervix. So she's in there at 20 weeks and she's told that that's happening. And therefore she becomes alarmed, because if you have a true placenta previa at the time that you give birth, you have to have a C-section. Like, it's one of the few true emergencies, because otherwise when the cervix opens, the placenta becomes detached and begins to bleed, and there's a danger that the baby will bleed out before the baby can come out. So it is a real emergency. However, having one at 20 weeks, a very tiny fraction of the time will that still be the case at full term. And the reason is that the uterus grows and stretches for the second half of the pregnancy, and the placenta can actually migrate upward. So it might be down there at the cervix to begin, but as the uterus stretches and grows, it kind of creeps up the edge and maybe nowhere near your cervix by the time you give birth. And yet we're still hearing habitually women being told, you have a partial placenta previa, so we're going to need to keep an eye on that. You're going to need to come back and get it tested. And then I hear these women freaking out. I might not be able to have my home birth. I might have to have a C-section at 20 weeks. So this is putting these women into this scenario where they're worrying during their pregnancy, and that is harmful and counterproductive to her and her baby. So it's just something to keep in mind when you're praying and thinking through which tests and procedures you'll have during pregnancy. Is the information I'm going to gain from this potentially going to worry me unnecessarily about things that I can't control, which then is going to detract from my enjoyment and my health? It's worth considering. Okay, so the next chapter in the book is called When a Woman is in Labor. What are her basic needs when she's actually in labor? And she compares labor to a different state of being, and it is an altered state of consciousness, like sleeping. And just like you can't force sleep, you can't force labor. You have to fall asleep, kind of fall into it, and you have to fall into labor. I had never heard anyone make that comparison, but I liked it. And then basically the rest of this section is her saying what a woman needs in labor is oxytocin. That's the main summary point. A woman needs oxytocin. Oxytocin is this love hormone that's secreted during breastfeeding, lovemaking, and childbirth, and other forms of connection too. But it's the hormone of love and bonding. And we release it in like pleasurable connecting circumstances and situations. And that oxytocin hormone is a huge driver of smooth, normal physiological birth. So oxytocin, facilitating the presence of oxytocin, is the basic need of a woman in labor. So, okay, you can't just like drink oxytocin. Oh, wait, you kind of can. You can have oxytocin pumped into your veins through an artificial synthetic version of it called Pitocin. or I think it has a different name in the UK. Syntocin, that's the other word, which is synthetic oxytocin. And so it's meant to do the work of oxytocin, which is to make the uterus contract, to strengthen contractions and bring the baby out. And it does do that pretty effectively, but it is fake. And it blocks the receptor sites of the actual, real, natural oxytocin that your body would be increasing or would be producing, and so can actually reduce your ability to create the natural form. And the natural form does far more for you than the fake form does. And this is one reason that Pitocin there's suspicions that Pitocin may be linked to postpartum mood disorders and disruptions to bonding. And it also creates contractions that are artificially incredibly severe and painful because it doesn't work with your body. It overpowers your body and the pathways that natural oxytocin would have taken. So what we need to do instead for women in labor is facilitate the production of natural oxytocin. So the baby, when he or she is ready to be born, will send a message that tells the mother's body that it is ready, which, holy freaking cow, that is one of those things that makes me say God's design is perfect. They think, more recent research shows that there might be something that happens when the baby's lungs are mature, that it releases a hormonal signal of some sort to the woman's body. Now is the time to be born. Now is the time to begin labor. And then the mother's body can begin labor by slowly releasing oxytocin, the hormone of love. The mother and baby work together to bring that baby into the world. So oxytocin is a shy hormone, she says. It needs to feel comfortable before it will be released. You have to coax it out and create conditions under which it will come out to play. So how do you do that? And that's what she gets into here. Her first point is a sense of security. A laboring woman needs to feel secure and safe. Mammals do this all the time. They'll find a secure place to give birth. A wonderful example is a female elephant who will form a circle. Female elephants who will form a circle around the laboring mother elephant with their backs turned to her. If the laboring mammal feels threatened, her labor will stop until she's in a safe place again. And human beings are not that different physiologically. We are also mammals after all. This is why if you've had a hospital birth or know somebody who has, they may say, or you may say, I was going along fine with labor at home, and when I got to the hospital, it kind of puttered out and stalled out. That often may be because she no longer feels safe and secure in that space. So it is of the utmost important that a woman feels safe and secure. And that means in the place where she's giving birth, but also in her relationship and in her relation with her partner, relationship with her caregiver, and the people who are in that space. If she doesn't feel safe, oxytocin won't come out. Next is the thinking brain needs to switch off. So all through your pregnancy, you're doing all this work to learn about labor and birth and prepare for it and know your options. You're thinking through things and you're studying and learning, and that's really good. And I'm not saying you shouldn't do it. And I have entire courses devoted to helping you do that. But when it comes to the actual time of labor and birth, you have to turn that off. This neocortex, or the prefrontal cortex, is the executive reasoning, higher thinking function of our brain. It doesn't serve us well in labor, and it doesn't encourage oxytocin to come out. We need to make sure that the laboring woman's thinking brain is not stimulated. We stimulate the neocortex during labor by talking to her about logical things, such as telling her how many centimeters dilated she is, or asking her to remember when her water broke, or what the last thing she ate was, or even questions like, what would you like to do next? Too much of that puts her back up in her neocortex. We stimulate her neocortex with these observations and these questions, and as a result, we slow down her release of oxytocin. A woman needs to be able to slowly fall into her labor like falling asleep and not be woken up by the outside world. Big one. Next, no observers. Feeling observed is another thing that halts oxytocin. I don't mean, this is kind of maybe a bad comparison, but it's not. If somebody was observing you when you were having sex, how do you think that would go for you? Not real well. Oxytocin does not like to be observed. So even if you have birth attendants, it is often really wise for them to give you space to be in a different room or a different part of the house, and or to arrive so late in your labor process that like the ship is already moving full steam ahead and there's no turning it around, you know? So again, observation fuels the neocortex, and it makes the woman feel like watched and like hurried. Oh, I better hurry. There's people waiting for me to finish up and perform this thing to get this baby out. So really important not to have that. Darkness. Oxytocin loves darkness. No bright lights. Drawing candles, curtains. I was a birth photographer before I was any other kind of birth worker, and developed a commitment pretty early on never to use a flash for this reason, because like bright flashes of light and observation, it reminds them that they're being observed by the camera. So think about a hospital, though. Most hospital rooms are pretty bright, unless you can go in and tell them you want the lights off. But otherwise, you're going to be laboring on this bed in the middle of a room with people watching you and monitoring you over monitors and bright lights. Like, this does not facilitate oxytocin release. And then we wonder why the labors are stalling out or not moving fast enough, failure to progress. Oh, we better interfere and give you fake oxytocin now. But you only need the fake oxytocin because you've been robbed of your ability to create the real stuff. Hospitals create the problems that they heroically solve. Okay, warmth is another thing that helps oxytocin. Just kind of skimming over this. So darkness, warmth, no observers, thinking brain off, sense of security. And also, you need to know that oxytocin is directly countered by another hormone, adrenaline, which is the stress hormone. So if there is fright, like if the woman's feeling frightened or anxious, she's producing adrenaline, which actually interferes with oxytocin. So it's really important, again, during your pregnancy, that you do work to reduce your fears. It's something I cover a lot of in my program and courses, because getting fear out of the way really is so central to having your birth unfold smoothly. It's also really important that your birth attendants check their fear at the door. So before you have somebody come into your birth space, you need to know that they can be adrenaline free, because you will pick up on it. Adrenaline is a somewhat contagious hormone. So if you have like a mother-in-law who's like, I really want to watch my grandbaby be born, but she's terrified that you're having a home birth, she either needs to do her work ahead of time to get free from that, or she needs to not come. That's my perhaps unpopular opinion. Yeah, because if somebody is feeling anxious or scared or nervous, everyone else in the room will soon start feeling that way too. And that's especially true when you're in labor. You're even more susceptible to other people's energy and hormones and moods and fear. And if someone is uncomfortable, they can take a break, leave the room, get recentered. I have a practice I do before I walk into a birthing space of like checking myself at the door, even before I get out of my car. I kind of check in, scan myself. Do I have any anxiety? Do I have any fear? And I hand those things to the Lord really specifically in prayer. And I imagine myself taking them off and putting them down on the ground. And I'm not going to take that into the room with me, because that's not about this woman and it's not about her birth. And I don't want to give it to her. Really important. Okay, so to summarize again, the basic needs of a woman in labor are to feel safe, to leave the thinking brain, silence, darkness or low lights, warmth, not feeling observed, no adrenaline. Isn't this good? It's so simple, but it's so good. She then has a basic birth plan. This assumes that you're going to the hospital, I guess. Well, maybe not. I guess you could do this for a home birth too. Home births tend to more naturally be honoring of the principles in this book. That doesn't mean always, especially if you end up having a midwife who is a little more medically minded or has her ego in the way and feels like she needs to meddle and fiddle. But generally speaking, home births are a little more honoring of the principles in this book. Then she has this whole section about the perfect birth attendant and what they're like and what she understands and how she behaves in light of that, which is really meaningful for me to read as a birth attendant. But again, I would recommend having anyone who wants to come to your birth read it. And then she talks about during pushing, the fetus ejection reflex. Have you heard this term? FER is the acronym for it. You'll hear it talked about quite a bit in natural undisturbed birth groups and in free birthing communities. It's basically an involuntary reflex that is kind of like throwing up through your vagina, to put it really coarsely, but it's an involuntary muscular spasm that literally ejects the baby from your body. You can't stop it if you want to, which is why even a woman in a coma can have a baby, because of fetal ejection reflex. When it happens, it doesn't really require the woman to actively push. She can choose to push along with that instinct and that urge, but she doesn't necessarily have to. Now, what Ruth talks about in here is that it can't take place if the basic needs of a woman in labor have not been met. So if her labor has not been characterized by those oxytocin encouraging conditions that we were just talking about, fetal ejection reflex is going to be a lot less likely to occur. If you're watching this and you've had babies, I would love to hear in the comments if you have experienced fetal ejection reflex or not. And there's no shame whether you have or not. I think it's somewhat of a mystery why it sometimes is there and sometimes isn't. But I do think Ruth is on to something by saying that we can maximize the chances of experiencing that by maximizing the conditions for oxytocin release during labor, and for the woman to be honored in those ways. And then after birth, she also talks about after birth, what does the woman need after the baby has come out? That this is a time when there's a massive surge of oxytocin and the bonding process starts. So much is going on for the baby. The baby will be adapting to the effect of gravity and the change in temperature. The mama and the baby should be considered one unit still and left together and undisturbed for at least an hour. No fiddling. Like, sometimes this bugs me. Like, I know that midwives like to, are supposed to, need to, whatever, check heart tones and respiration after a baby first comes out and just make sure they're all good. And then they'll like sometimes towel dry them and all the things. And if you're at the hospital, it's even more than that. Sometimes they'll cut the cord right away and whisk the baby off to a table nearby to do some assessment and evaluation of them. But she's saying, no, leave them together, and as much as you can, minimize the fiddling and the fidgeting. The mother will naturally do a lot of things that stimulate the baby, so maybe toweling them off vigorously is not necessary. If you have to do heart tones and respiration counts, do that just really quickly and unobtrusively. Otherwise, keep your hands off and leave the mom and baby alone. No need to rush to cut the umbilical cord because it remains open, and then baby can gain up to 40 milliliters of precious blood just by leaving the cord connected and not cut for at least 5 minutes. And yeah, she talks a little more about cord and how it's a ritual, but just reminds us not to rush it. And then I'll end with this summary statement from her. It is a strange fact that one of the greatest discoveries of the 20th century is that a baby needs its mother in the moments after birth. Now it seems that we need to discover that it needs its mother and nobody else. So that is about it for this book. Oh, and then she has a kind of a neat story in the end. Just kind of demonstrating this all working well in a real scenario. Like, she tells a story about a home birth situation and what the midwife is doing and is not doing and what the mother is doing and kind of just what unfolds. And it was a sweet picture just to really bring it vividly to life of what this can look like when we put these principles into action. All right, that was a lot of talking from me. I got a little fired up about this, but I find this book to be very much an argument for home birth, because although a lot of this you can fight for and make happen in a hospital, you're going to have to work a lot harder for it. Whereas at home, again, it's more naturally facilitated. And these principles are born out of a lot of research and experience from Michelle Odant. And yeah, so that's my book review. I'll stop there. I recommend the book.